I'll be looking for the approval of the agenda in all subcommittees.
So moved.
Moved? Seconded? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approval of the minutes of November 15th, 2022.
So moved.
Moved? Seconded? All those in favor? Aye. I'd like to start off by sending in regrets today. The warden and Councillor Mitchell are both out ill, and Councillor Rhino will be joining us later today after he returns from an appointment this morning. All right, next we will have, first off, I'd like to say welcome to all the families that are here for our next item on the agenda, the presentation of the Queen Jubilee Medals. And it's a great thing, and it's something that you guys all share in as well, because all the hard work that the people who are receiving the awards today would not be possible without your guys' support. All right. So there's a little preamble I'll be reading that goes along with this. Good morning, Council, municipal staff, invited guests. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to welcome you to this investor ceremony for the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal. As Deputy Warden, I'll be your Master of Ceremonies today. You're welcome to take photographs throughout the ceremony, and feel comfortable if you need to take your photograph to get up a little bit closer of your loved one. More than welcome to. I now ask all recipients, please rise for everybody to join me in recognizing their outstanding individuals that are being honored. The individuals that are being recognized, could please rise. Thank you. You guys can be seated. Just a quick second. Again, we're going to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki in the District of Spaganagity, the ancestral, territorial, and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Thank you for joining us today to honor the service and dedication of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and to recognize exceptional Nova Scotians who have undertaken works that emulate the example of the late Queen. Today we gather to pay tribute to those who have given their time, talents, in service to our communities, our province, and our country. Nova Scotia's Platinum Jubilee Medal commemorates the 70th anniversary of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth's accession to the throne as Queen of Canada, and it serves as a tribute to her life and service. Her Majesty was crowned on June 2nd, 1952, during her coronation ceremony, which was held at Her Majesty's Westminster Abbey, as coronations have been done for 900 years. Her Majesty went on to live a lifetime of service, dedicating more than 70 remarkable years of continuous service to Canada and countries throughout the Commonwealth. This extraordinary achievement made her our longest reigning and longest lived monarch in modern history. A video celebrating Queen Elizabeth's long-standing connection with Nova Scotia through Her Majesty's 5 tours of our province will be available on our social media channels following today's presentation. Prior to her death, at the beginning of the Platinum Jubilee year, Her Majesty expressed a wish that Jubilee events be an occasion for enjoying a sense of togetherness and optimism about the future, which makes today the perfect opportunity to celebrate the achievements of people who make our community better. Today's medal recipients lead rather than wait to be led. They tackle challenges head on. They see problems as opportunities instead of obstacles. Congratulations to everyone receiving this special honor. It is now my pleasure to present the following medals to the following recipients. I'll call your name and you can come up and I'll just read what's going on. First, Mike Brown. Stand right here, Mike. Mike is an exceptional individual who has led our waste management site for over 20 years. Mike was a key part to our essential service operation during the pandemic and led our efforts to ensure safe, efficient, and responsible management of waste during this unprecedented time. And for this, Mike, we're presenting you with the Queen's Jubilee Medal. Oh, there you go. That's also for you too. Thank you. Our next recipient couldn't be here today, but we still want to recognize them. Sue Surratt. Sue demonstrates her dedication to East Hants through supporting council, our residents, frontline staff, and fire department executives. With practical advice, empathetic leadership, and professionalism second to none. During the pandemic, Sue was instrumental in keeping frontline services operational. Sue will receive her award at a later date. Next, Tracy Dixon. Tracy's dedication to the safety and well-being of our staff and community is unwavering. During the pandemic, she was instrumental in supporting the team in making very difficult and unprecedented decisions. It's my honor to present this to you, Tracy. There you go. There's a pin and a thank you. Next, Kelly Ash. As Development Officer, Kelly Ash is key in building the successful community of East Hants, East Hants is today. In her role as the Emergency Management Operation Coordinator, Kelly coordinated with the provincial team for the pandemic and is involved in ongoing planning and support to the community during all emergency events. For this, Kelly. There you go. Whoops. Hold it.
Thank you.
There you go. Thank you. Next, Andrea Trask. Under Andrea's direction, East Hants has received the North American recognition for our programs. Andrea has a passion for municipal government and is a leader in her field, shaping the solid waste landscape positively in Nova Scotia during her 20-year career. Congratulations, Andrea.
Thank you.
There you go. There you go. You're welcome. And our final recipient, Corinne Giles. Corinne has demonstrated dedication to her community through her work and personal volunteerism with the local fire service. She has worked with community groups to help build our community and has also provided recreation programs to East Hants throughout her 15-year career. Thank you, Corinne. All right, that concludes our presentation today. So please join me in congratulating all of our Platinum Jubilee Medal recipients. It's through the effort and hard work of individuals that were recognized today and many other individuals that also reside here in East Hants and work for us that allow our community to grow and become one of the fastest growing communities in all of Nova Scotia. So thank you. We are going to take a group photo of all the medal recipients. So I will turn it over to our There you go. Thank you. All right, but that does not conclude our recognitions today. We have some new employee introductions. For that, I will turn it over to the CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Warden. Today we have one new employee who joined us, Ben Herman. He joined us yesterday, so he's very, very new. We're pleased that he's joined our INO team as our civil engineering tech. Ben comes from the private industry where he worked as an environmental technician. He's performed all kinds of work that's similar to what he's going to be doing in his new role. And along with Alex, who we introduced last month, the two of those gentlemen will be taking on all of your transportation and technical requirements, sort of boots on the street folks for INO. And we're thrilled, I know Jesse is thrilled to have a full complement in that division again. So welcome, Ben, and we hope you have a long, prosperous career here at East Hants.
Yes, welcome, Ben. On behalf of all council, welcome, and I'm sure you are well aware there's lots of work. There are no position changes or recognitions. This will all be done in January. Next on the agenda is council procedure policy, and back to the CAO.
I don't like to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're here as Mr. Chairman, aren't you? So, councillors, this is not new information for you. We did discuss this very briefly last month, and I think in an email to you. There is a required change of how we do our in-camera sessions when things that require council to expend money, when decisions are being made. The recommendation is to move those decisions to be in your council procedural policy meeting in lieu of going in camera during your committees, so executive committee, PAC, that type of thing. So the recommendation today is to make some changes. Also for the audit committee, these are a lot of housekeeping changes. And we'd also like to have a conversation today around the decision that was made by council a number of years ago now during the pandemic. When we first started live streaming your meetings, the decision was made by council to keep those meetings for 3 months. And that's part of your council procedural policy. There is a discussion in the report just around what other folks are doing. We did a jurisdictional scan to see what municipalities do with respect to their live stream. Of the 14 municipalities that we looked at, 9 continue to live stream after the pandemic and 5 do not. And of those 9, only one of them limits public access to 1 year. The rest of them have their live stream available since the start. So I think at the time when council made the decision to go for 3 months, there was some uncertainty as to how it was going to play out, what it would be like to have your meetings live streamed and available to the public. And we just thought it would be a good time to reevaluate and just have a check-in with you to see if you still want those to be limited to 3 months. I know as staff, we find tremendous value being able to go back to those and listen to conversations that have happened. But really, it's a decision. It's in your procedural policy, and it's a decision that you folks would have to make. But I would certainly recommend, even not live stream, not limiting them. but again, it's at the discretion of committee. So there is 3 sections of possible motions to recommend to bring your, this wouldn't change your policy today. It would make recommendations to bring your policy back for consideration with the appropriate edits. So one is the audit committee, just having 2 members of council on the audit committee instead of 1. That is coming forward from a prior discussion. The second part is a brief council meeting shall be convened as applicable immediately following, and then we've added what that could be used for, what that meeting could be used for, and then the third being the putting a limit on the live streams, be it a certain number of months or indefinitely.
Thank you, CAO. First up to speak, Councillor Gardencole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to make a comment on the amount of time that we keep the live stream. Somehow that escaped me that they only remained on there for 3 months. I'm definitely in favor of keeping them somewhere between more than 3 months and indefinitely. I too go back to those and refer to them fairly often when I'm looking for things. And I think that the public should be able to, staff, everyone should have access to those definitely longer than 3 months. So that's my opinion on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there any more discussion? Councillor Green.
I would move the recommended motion with the third section to state the recording shall remain on the municipal YouTube channel for an indefinite period.
Second mover. Do we have a second? Seconded by Councillor. Councillor Tingley, you were on before the motion. Go ahead.
I was going to speak to another motion, actually.
Okay. So we have motion on the floor. Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. And the motion is passed unanimously. Oh, there was a nay, sorry. Okay, Councillor Tingley, you were on.
I'll make the motion to have 2 members of council for the audit committee.
Yeah, we voted on all 3 motions. as
all
presented.
3, okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Is there anything else?
No, that was it. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries, Councillor. All right. I guess back to you, CAO. Project stability, sustainability.
Oh. I think I'm supposed to be downloading these in a sec. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So councillors, as we prepare for our budget for 2023, 2024, if you can imagine, light show going on here. As we prepare for our budget, we're looking at the different human resource requirements of the municipality. I have spoken to council in the past about needing more resources in some of our key areas for support services. So in the upcoming budget, you will see positions in our planning department, in our infrastructure and operations department, in our finance department. All of those places need additional resources to keep the lights on. This one is something that I need to get in front of council and sort of do a check-in with you on your strategic plan, on your commitment to clean energy and the environment, that type of thing, before I go ahead and sort of work out the budget and figure out if this is a position or a direction that council wants to go in. So if you'll remember a couple of strategic plans ago, we actually had in our strategic plan that because we weren't resourced sufficiently, we were not going to undertake energy projects, green initiatives, specifically for the municipality or partnering with partners in the community to do those things, because we simply didn't have the resources or the technical knowledge on staff to make that happen. So the question before you today, we've sort of fast forward to 2022. So I think we're 2 plans since then. Your strategic plan actually does speak to doing these types of initiatives, and we'll talk a little bit about the plan connectivity in a minute. So what we did, I had Nathan, our policy analyst, do some jurisdictional scan of who has sustainability coordinators. There have been sustainability coordinators hired by municipalities for years in Nova Scotia. Some municipalities, back when we were saying, no, we don't have the resources, were neck deep in sustainability issues, and they've done a lot of work around their green initiatives for their community. These have ranged everything from, promoting a no idle program at drive-throughs, all the way to, building LEED certified buildings and everything in between. We have municipalities that are in the wind energy game. There's no shortage of projects that have been done. And we've dabbled in them over the years. We've done some energy audits and things like that on our own buildings. We've had a few solar installations over the years, but really we haven't sort of dove in to that realm. In the next few years, I think what you're going to see, and I'm not following the script of my report, but the next few years, what you're going to see is more funding for sustainability initiatives. And that seems to be where all of the major federal funds are going, all of those programs. So I think there is going to be federal and provincial support to support sustainability projects. And the question is, are we going to be ready to do those or not? With the current complement that we have of staff, we may be able to do something, but I think it would be the things we have to do anyway, we would do green, but there's not going to be any other initiatives around green technology and sort of that climate change impact projects that the provincial government in their new legislation is requiring of the provincial level of government. So that's where I'm at, to say if we had somebody on staff who was focused on preparing these projects as well as going out and getting funding for these projects, as well as doing other smaller projects for, sort of corporate projects, would be part of this role as it ramps up. I guess that's the question in front of council today. Do we want to be in that position, or do we want to stay where we're at? So sustainability coordinator, project coordinator, this role would look at both skill sets. You're looking between $60,000 and $75,000 a year for somebody who could fill that role. The provincial goals I've outlined in the report. So they have set in their 2021 legislation some pretty lofty goals. And what does that look like for East Hants? So part of that act says the province is going to work with municipalities to make these projects happen. that tells me that they're also committed to funding. For East Hants, when we look through your strategic plan, reducing your carbon footprint and mitigating the impacts of climate change are definitely part of your long-term plan. So what might this look like? So in East Hants, this looks like investing in solar energy, which is a huge market, and one where we can, one of our biggest expenses is certainly power in our budget. So when you're looking at running all those lift station pumps, that's probably our biggest, water and sewer, our biggest consumers of electricity. So putting in some solar power there. But there's also going to that next step and looking at, do we want to do a solar farm at the Waste Management Center? How is our organics going to be processed from here on out? Is that going to be something we can tie in? Looking at electric vehicles, the federal government has said that 100% of new light-duty sales in Canada will be zero emissions by 2035. Well, that sounds like a long time, but when you realize we keep a municipal vehicle for sort of 5 to 7 years, we're going to be cycling out our current vehicles. Maybe the next round will should be electric vehicles. Well, you can't just buy an electric vehicle and drive it. You're then into, we need vehicle charging stations, and where should those charging stations be, and how are they going to be paid for, and all of those things. So that would be part of electrifying your fleet, is doing all that work to get ready for that, as well as putting charging stations in through your community. So you have that community infrastructure that people need for all of these electric cars that are going to be sold by 2035. We do a lot of active transportation work now. Currently, INO and PRC are doing that. We have a lot of work that we could be doing in water conservation that we don't have the resources to do. District metering for water, that's probably something that we would get to as part of one of our capital projects eventually, but certainly having someone looking for that funding and doing that legwork would help. We've talked about sort of down at the Elmsdale school site, things like having community gardens and markets and things that help with your food sustainability and bringing your community together in green initiatives. We've talked a lot about transit. We have a study that's been done that will be back up on your radar in the next few months. So what does that look like? We've always talked about doing transit at some point, but never have we been able to identify the person who's going to sort of do the legwork to get it underway. Graham's been working on that through EBD, but he certainly doesn't have the time to actually implement a transit service and where do you put your bus stops? Who's going to do the contract for that? Like all of those things need bodies to work. We've talked a lot about ecotourism. In East Hants, we're well primed for ecotourism. Reducing transportation of solid waste is going to be huge for us in the next few years. So looking at our solid waste programs and do we want to take on organics processing at our waste management facility? How do our transfer stations work? What's the best and most efficient way to do that with respect to climate change? And then we do have a PACE program in play. We've talked about loan and septic program management. We're working on that right now through Nathan. And then, of course, there's all the work that we have to do on our energy retrofits or energy audits and potential retrofits of our existing buildings, our condition assessments, all of those things. So that is a long list. All things that I've heard this council talk about and sort of look to the future for, but I don't have anyone to spearhead a lot of that work. Some of it may come as part of our regular work, as I mentioned, but for the most part, we need a body to do those. So as I mentioned, there is funding available, but there is also funding for this particular role. So staff have submitted a pre-screening application for an opportunity to get funding for this role, up to 80%. And we've put into that proposal the the energy audits for our municipal assets, for 4 of our municipal assets. So the structural, electrical, mechanical systems, looking at those. So that would be a bigger project, but it would cover at least the initial year of this position. Aligning with our strategy, as I mentioned, we do have an objective in our current strategy of investing in energy initiatives that support the sustainability of our organizations and the communities we serve. So this role would be moving us closer to that strategic objective. And I guess the question is this something that council wants to go ahead and put in your draft budget, see where it fits? And if so, is it conditional upon getting the funding, or is it we should do this, and if we get funding, more the better? And of course, your alternatives are your status quo. So councillors, that's the report. I didn't put a recommended motion. I guess I want to sort of hear the discussion, and if you think that you would like to see a position in your draft budget, then that would be the route that you would take. But I don't want to presume that council wants to go down this road because it is a road. It's not just a position. It's, do you want to be in the business of green energy and climate change reduction?
Thank you, CAO. First up to speak, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I look at it, we can either be first in the line going down the road, or we can be drug in at the last. So we might as well be entering into the road now. I think it's a sign of the times. Everybody's going to have to do it. I would move that we include this position in the draft budget.
Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Hebb. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none? Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. All the votes are in, and it has passed unanimously. On the schedule, this brings us to our break, but we're not at the time, so we're going to push forward until we reach the time before we take that break. So next up, we'll have Fire Services Financial Guidelines Update from Adam.
I know, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as committee may recall, in 2021, the East Hants Fire Service Association submitted a request to council to update and review the financial guidelines for the volunteer fire departments. So that's what we've done over the past close to a year with the fire service. The fire service nominated a subcommittee of their chiefs. So there were 3 chiefs, Mr. Tyler Dauphin, Mr. Vandereet, Chief Vandereet, and Rolston, Deputy Chief Rolston, I believe, from Rawdon. So in front of you today is essentially a synopsis of the amended guidelines. And there's been quite a bit of changes, and I'm going to just quickly walk through them with committee today. These guidelines were initially established in 2004. It's really a document that's set out by council that really is good fiscal management as council transitions the levies to your fire departments from the taxpayers. And it also provides parameters and guidelines around the procurement services, and also how we support the fire service in various ways, such as the accounting for their books, for most of them. So the last edits were done in 2012, so it's been almost 10 years since this has really been brought back and had a hearty review. And as I mentioned, the bullet points on the screen in front of you are the key headings within the document. So those are the headings of the guidelines. And I'm just going to touch on really the key changes. And this is something the fire service was very supportive of. It really provides the fire service a little bit more autonomy and some of the ways they go about doing business with them, within their departments. And really, it's a collaborative approach between the municipality and the fire service to really help them do what they do best, which is provide emergency first response for our community. So under the banking section, the original guidelines had 2 sections, and we really expanded that. So now there's 7 sections within that one. We provided clarity on how revenues are accounted for when coming from sources of funds outside of the municipality. And we've also identified that signing authorities within the fire service must not be in close personal relationships. So they may have multiple members within their association that can sign for their payables. And it's a internal check and balance for fiscal accountability within the departments. Under the purchasing section, this section's really been rewritten to align with procurement practices of the municipality. So we really kind of align them with what we do at an internal municipal level where we can. And respecting the capacity within the departments and the resources that they have to go through the procurement. So we've taken a step and we've increased the minimum purchase value from $1,000 to $5,000 before 3 quotes are required. And we've also increased the quote requirement from between $5,000 and $50,000. So that really, we've been hearing a lot around the procurement from the fire service, and that really just enables them to use it within their capacity and align more closely with the municipality. And over $50,000, it requires a public tender, and that's up from $5,000. So just a side note to the procurement, we do help the fire service with larger procurements if they request. I think this past year, we've done about 4 or 5 larger procurements from anything from facility renovations or acquisition of large fire trucks. Michael Hatfield, who will be in front of you later today, really supports the fire services when requested. We've also done in the other section clarified language around policies relating to meal allowances, really just brought them in line with where they should be today. And also under municipal provisions for bookkeeping services, we've really just simplified that section. When we reread it from where it was to where it is, we've just done a lot of housekeeping within that section and some language around petty cash there for the fire services. Council's well aware of where this fits within your strategic plan. And so there are 2 documents that were attached to your report today. One was the original document from 2012. One was the updated one from 2022 that's in front of you today, and we're looking for some direction from committee on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Adam. Looking to council for any input on this draft policy in front of us. Councilor Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, looking at this with 2 hats on, this is, it was overdue. I mean, the reworking, from my point of view, from the fire service side, it looks good to me. And from a council side, it still keeps the onus on, accountability in that. I think it's well written. And on that good, I would move the recommended motion.
Moved by Councilor Green, seconded by Councilor Musa. Councilor Musa, you were on before the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a small question. So we know a lot, especially in the rural areas, there's a lot of volunteering and stuff. So if a project's gonna cost like over $50,000 and the community or somebody like offers some in kind, like, or some donation of work and stuff, so and this way they could save a lot of money. So, would that be possible if the cost is going to be over $50,000, not to go to tender and do it like locally if they have a lot of donation of work and?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair, two things on that. So I forgot to mention we did add in a new section for alternative procurement practices to be approved by the membership, which is something our procurement officer will walk through with the chiefs and associations. The 50,000 requirement is for public tendering, but there are kind of unique circumstances which can be discussed with the procurement at the time. It really isn't intended, once you've hit that threshold, it really should go to market from a fiscal accountability perspective. However, we do recognize there are unique circumstances in every community, and those can be talked through. And just a footnote to that, I am presenting this report for the committee, but I forgot to give the credit where the credit is due. This was really a team effort of Sue, who worked with the fire service on this, Michael Hatfield, our procurement officer, and our CAO. So I'm presenting this to you, but it really was a collaborative effort with the fire service to put this together. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Musa. And if the committee will indulge me for a second, I also have a question, kind of along the same lines as Councillor Musa. With that contracting, would they be able to break up the scope of work? Would the contracting for tender be by scope of work? So this way here, if, say, the Knoll Fire Department had a member who had an excavation business and they were willing to donate work in lieu of kind, that portion of the work could be taken out of the tender because it was being donated or at a severely reduced rate, and that portion of the project could be split up that way. Could that happen?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. There's lots of ways we could structure with the contracts.
Okay, good. Because I know that's a big concern across most of the fire services throughout East Hants. We have a lot of great volunteer firefighters who own their own businesses and do a lot to help the communities when they can as well. All right, motions on the floor. Any further discussion? Questions be called. And the votes are in, and it's passed unanimously. Who's doing the... Oh. So we're going to continue to move on with Adam, and we're going to talk about the fire training facility. First off, I'd just like to let council know I'm on a new medication, and it's messing with my voice. It kind of frogs me up and makes me sound a little funny. So I'm not sick. I've just got some new things going on. All right, go ahead, Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this next item in front of you is a relatively recent item that council may recall from this past month at the council level. You received some correspondence from the fire service requesting some funding regarding their fire training facility, which they've identified as a location in Knoll. So this report's really going to give all of council some corporate history on the subject and bring it to date, and then identify options to how to move forward with that request that's in front of you. So really back in 2013, there was a motion of the council of the day when a request came in from the fire service really relating to two things: providing support, funding support for training of firefighters, and also providing funding support for a fire facility. So the first part, which was the program for training firefighters, you've had incorporated into policy for many years. Council provides an annual allotment that goes towards the basic firefighter training and the officer training. So that piece has been taken care of for quite some time. The training facility piece, the intent of the motion was that the fire service needed to select a location and work with the municipality on funding opportunities. And council for numerous years put aside $20,000 in the annual operating budget for the motion had for multiple years, and then it ceased when it was approximately $120,000, and now that's grown with interest to $128,000. So there's an allocation of funding that's been sitting there for numerous years. In the meantime, the local Elmsdale Fire Department built a fire training grounds on their property. They did not request any money from the municipality. They did quite an amazing job with their facility, with their own resources, some local support donations, and also their funding. And we toured that facility in the summertime with myself and some members of the fire service and Michael Hatfield, our procurement officer. And it really is just, it's a really remarkable opportunity for the training of their members. That being said, the fire service is now in a position where they've looked at an alternative location, which is in the rural area in the northern in Knoll, which will serve It can serve all of East Hants members, but really specifically, it will focus on that rural component. So it was brought to their meeting, the Chiefs meeting. The CAO was there at that meeting and had a conversation with the chiefs around it. And initially, they were looking at, Noel was looking at accessing the initial funding and then requesting council to, and I say, Noel, that's the location. It's a fire service conversation. And they were looking at utilizing the initial funding and then to do the second phase, and I'll walk through what the phases are in a minute, ask council to continue building funding over the next numerous years. The CAO had mentioned, well, it might be more efficient to get it all done at once if the funding is currently available. So would that be something? And they said yes. So when the letter came in, we've looked at our funding sources and we'll present those in a minute. So that's kind of getting where we are today. And I just want to take a minute and walk through. This is a budget that's been prepared by the East Hants Fire Service, and they're they propose that it's a $225,000 all-in project, and that may sound like a decent amount, but when we walk through and you see what the value this brings to the fire service, it really is phenomenal. So the budget that they presented touches on these key areas. It is attached in the appendix of the report. And just to walk committee here through today of the pictures of the Elmsdale building, it's really 2 levels. It's 4 CCANs, and it's more than just CCANs. And for those councillors that were on the RCMP tour this past week and you saw the training center and the value that brings to the RCMP policing service, this really is a parallel for the fire service. And what it does is allows them to work towards their basic firefighting skills so then they can go and do their testing. So for example, you'll see in the pictures there's stairways going up and down. Those aren't simply stairways. Those are to simulate as you're going into a basement of a building or of a house or going upstairs into a basement. You can really play out those scenarios and work towards those fundamental training. There's doors in here where they would teach breaching. There's a railing on top where you can do ladder work or ventilation exercises. And there's even windows throughout this one in Elmsdale that really help with emergency procedures for bailouts and egress and so forth. So all of these search and rescue. So that's really a snapshot of what Noel is looking at. Paralleling to they will make it their own, but using this as their basis of their design. Elmsdale has been very open to sharing what they can, their lessons learned. Also, from an engineering perspective, these do need to be an engineered structure, so that is reducing the risk. So that's really what's in front of you today. They have the budget, and if council or committee wants to proceed, staff would end up drafting a funding agreement. And the key areas in the funding agreement is how the funds would be used. We want to ensure the structures are being signed off on engineers. We want to ensure long-term facility access for all fire service members. Various risk mitigation clauses such as indemnification. Municipal recognition is always an important part of council's funding programs, reporting requirements, planning approval, and as part of one of the funding sources we're recommending today, there are requirements that it is owned publicly, so if for some reason something happens, it needs to be maintained in public ownership for a period of time because some of the funding sources could be coming from the federal government, and that's a stipulation. So I've been going kind of fast there, getting through this, but the last section I wanted to touch on is really the funding. So the fire service at the meeting with the chiefs were really supportive of requesting the full use of that $128,000 that's been sitting there for quite some time. So that really leaves a balance if council wants to proceed of the project, just under $100,000. And so when we look at the benefit, it is a benefit to the fire service, but it's also a benefit to the rural area. So we've taken a look at what reserves would be appropriate for funding. And there's 2 rural reserves that would be available. You can see the balances right here in those 2 reserves. The Canada Community Build Fund Rural does have, you can see it's $431,000, but there's only $283,000 that's eligible because the federal government, and actually recognition to count this council and previous councils and the fire service lobbied for changes for the fire service. It's really opened up $283,000 of that since 2021 to be eligible for projects such as this. So that's eligible, and then there's also the $473,000 that is really less conditional ties to that grant funding. So I think it would be strategic for council to leave that 473 as is and use the funding that is allocated from the federal government if you want to move forward with this. So you can see the check marks beside the two funding sources. And when I go back up to the recommendations, staff are recommending that you approve the funding request from the East Hants Fire Service for $225,000 for a facility in Knoll. With the first funding coming from the Common Fire Training Reserve in the amount of the balance, which is approximately $128,000, with the remaining funds coming from the Rural Canada Community Build Fund Reserve up to the maximum of $97,000. So that's what's in front of committee today. We will, just as another piece, if council does move forward, we will have the chief sign off. Part of the original intent of the motion was 2/3 of the fire chief to use that funding. We did get support through that meeting, but we will get all of the chiefs to sign off on that to ensure there's a 2/3 support there. So that is the report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Adam. First up to speak, Councillor Hebb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, this would complete the project if he used all his money.
Correct.
You know, I mean, they have 120, so at the end of the day, we have it built and there'd be no more bills for the taxpayer, basically.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think this is a project that's long overdue. I also think it's an initiative for new members too. In rural departments, it's always a problem trying to keep and maintain members, but when you have a training facility there and the public sees that not everything is happening in the urban area, this is going to happen in the rural area as well. So I think it'd be a big initiative for you may get new members out of this to see that things are happening in the rural department. So with that, I'll move the recommended motion as presented.
Moved by Councillor Hebb. Seconded by Councillor Musa. On to speak before the motion, Councillor Eisner.
Thank you. Do they have other facilities like this in the province? Do they cross over, train, I know our Enfield team went over to Europe, they do, that's for competition, mind you, but do you do anything with Colchester or local ones? And do they have facilities like that too? Can we build something that's even a supersized one that can be used for other counties? Thank you.
Sorry, I believe Councillor Green will be able to answer your question there, Councillor Eisner.
Just to speak to that, there are various facilities at fire departments throughout Nova Scotia. I can speak to one that's in Salmon River. It's an actual burn structure which was developed by Smith's Welding. I know Enfield have been up there, some of Elmsdale and that. They're very open if you book it into training because they can do some live fire and smoke training in this building. So there is, and if you ever drive up through Old Barnes, look behind the upper hall in Cobequid, they have 2 C-cans there. You go up through Hilton, they've got a C-can and a tower there. There's, it's, every corner of the province has something, somewheres, so a department has.
So are we up to speed with other counties?
This will bring us there.
Yeah.
Yeah, this will bring us there.
Thank you.
All right, just before the motion, I'd like to ask a question. In conversations with the Fire Chief Council, this facility, if they're gonna, I believe the intent is to mirror what was done in Elmsdale. That is one type of training. There's other facilities, there's other things you can build to go on with this training. Have they been engaged to look at a longer term plan, like getting this done now, but then building on into the future? Because I don't see our fire services becoming any less needed, and I don't see any of the responsibilities getting smaller. I only see them getting larger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know in Elmsdale, they've looked at other training components as well. And with this one just in front of you, I didn't show you the layout. This is in Knoll. where they're projecting of putting it kind of their site map, but there's quite a bit of lands there as well. You're absolutely right. There are other stages of training, whether it's vehicle extrication and so forth, that can be built on, and other types of fire props, if you will. We haven't had, to your direct question, we haven't had those longer term on what's next. I do know the fire service is always thinking about how they build out in strategic locations of the municipality, and maybe there's another area where there's other services that could be provided. So I don't know if any of the chiefs has had more specific conversations to this specific site on future phases, but I think this is pretty substantial for them.
Thank you. Yeah, the layout definitely does help me to make sure, because, you know, this is going to be a huge asset for the rural part of East Hants. And, you know, being able to build upon that means you can have multiple training going at the same time. But I'll let Councillor Green.
Yeah, look, as you well know, Mr. Chair, the fire service is always reinventing itself and moving forward. On the training ground there with the blue one, I believe that's going to be a cement pad for extrication, like a kind of a containment sort of pad. The Knoll site was chosen because we already have the pond and the hydrant there, like the infrastructure is already there. And there's many things, like we have had the burn unit from the mobile burn unit in there probably 5 times. It hasn't moved since COVID, but I think there is talk and rumors that it's going to start moving again. So you can do all your training there, and you can bring the burn unit. If you look where the hydrant is, that's all a huge parking lot, and the burn unit usually sits on the other side. And we have, like, we had departments from Cobequid down to it. We had it for a week. So there's a lot of potential. And yes, things are always change. They're always in flux, because like you said about the electric vehicles, that's the next big thing. 2035, that's not that far out. Everything's going to start being electric. Cut one of those cables, you're down one firefighter when you cut that cable. There's a lot of training to be done on them, and it's a work in progress every day.
Thank you, Councillor Green. And that kind of was to my point was, you know, this is step one. There's a lot more that's going to come. So ensuring that we continue to rebuild that fund into the future in some way, I think would also be beneficial, and we can probably look at that come budget time, I would imagine. Oh, sorry, Councillor McPhee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to staff. I'm thinking of the funding, so I think it's inevitable that they'll go over by probably $40,000 building this phase. How do they plan to fund if they have cost overruns?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, they have built some contingency in their budget, but as the project, you're right, plays out, it will be for them to manage. So they've set their upset limit, and that's the decision that's council making. I guess if they do go over, they either need to look at the other sources of funding within the fire service, or I guess ultimately they would come back to council and request for additional funds. Hopefully that isn't the case. Or they may, you know, as they move forward, maybe there's a component that they aren't able to achieve at this time. And although they're working towards both phases at once, maybe there's a piece that they don't move forward with. You know, and they prioritize within their allocation. So we have presented kind of their full vision, but as they move forward through the project management piece, I guess that would be something, a consideration. And we would build that check-in through the funding agreement at a staff level to ensure the funds are being used what they're intended to be used for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no one left to speak, motion's on the floor. Question's been called. The votes are in, and it's passed unanimously. Brings us to our next item on the list, special service or special reserves policy, and the CAO is going to take this one. Oh, sorry, Councillor Green.
Just as a footnote to that, I'd just like to give a little bit of recognition to retired Chief Mac Noble. He was the one probably 2.5 years ago that started making the snowball for the rural side, and really got it rolling. And you know, thanks to him, he's been on board with it and helped move this project along exponentially. Just like to give him a little shout out there.
Absolutely. Well deserved. Take it away, CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, the draft special reserve policies in front of you today, I am presenting it on our Director of Finance's behalf. And absolute recognition for this work goes to the Finance Department. Sue, Janice, and Jordan have been working quite diligently pulling this together. And it's something that's been on our work plan for years, and was something that was easy just sort of to put to the side until we realized that most of our finance department is going to be retiring in the next 5 to 10 years. And then you sort of have a panic to figure out who's going to know all the information about our reserves and how we use them and what we do with them. So what you have in front of you today, councillors, is a report which outlines why you should have a special reserves policy. And again, we're not presuming that you're going to, approve this policy today, but I think you should. This policy will take you into the future of documenting and really formalizing what your reserves are for. And again, probably should stick to my script for the public's benefit. So reserve funds are used by council to set aside money for various reasons. The Municipal Government Act legislates how we must use reserve funds. And you have several policies of council that talk about how you can withdraw money from reserves and your budgeting and whatnot, and how those play into that. This policy really formalizes a lot of conversation that have been held at budget meetings and in council meetings over the last several decades. I know in my tenure here in the last 2 decades, we've talked a lot about, you've heard me say as your Director of Finance, well, you have a practice or a policy that you use your reserves in this way, or at budget time you set aside so much money for this particular purpose. Janice and her finance team have spreadsheet upon spreadsheet of reserves of how we've used them, where money's been withdrawn from them to use them for projects, and then where in your annual budget you put money into those reserves knowing that you want to build it up for something in particular. So we do have healthy reserves. It is a critical part of your financial management and your sustainability in that financial management. So I don't want to underestimate the importance of your reserves. And when people see you have $37.5 million or $36.7 million in capital and operating reserves, that is an incredible amount of money. But all of that money is there for specific purposes. So you have set that aside. And what that does for your taxpayer is, as you need money to do these larger projects that are on your books, or if something unexpected happens, you don't have to raise your tax rate one year and drop it the next, and raise it and drop it and raise it and drop it. You can have a fairly consistent tax rate knowing that you also have money set aside to do these projects. And of course, we all want to avoid debt. That is one of the key elements of your reserves. So you're not a council who has to go out and borrow money for those smaller projects. So when you go out and borrow money, you're going out to borrow it for a large project of a significant nature. So it's, a $7 million wastewater treatment plant, or, you want to buy a larger project, the waste management center, things like that. So our reserves are used quite often for, you need a consultant for $60,000 consultant, or you need to build or buy a piece of land for $400,000 or. So those smaller things you're not generally going out and borrowing money for. So you do have 4 different types of reserves, and the report talks about those. We have special reserves, which are set aside for specific purposes. The Municipal Government Act says that you must have a capital reserve, and it outlines exactly what has to go into that capital reserve. So you don't have a choice. So if you sell land, I don't think I've listed them in here, but if you sell land, you have to put that money into a capital reserve. And it's very prescriptive about how you take that money out. When you put money into your operating reserves, and council switched this probably about 7 or 8 years ago, you can use money in your operating reserves for capital or operating. So you'll see you've got a lot of money in your operating reserves because we basically, about 7 or 8 years ago, took everything that was set aside for both capital and operating, and we put it into the operating reserve. So you'll see that throughout the list as well. We also have what we call obligatory reserves, and that's a public sector accounting board term. Those are monies that are collected from the public or developers specifically for a purpose. So your obligatory reserves are collected on your water and wastewater infrastructure charges, your open space charges that you charge developers when we create their subdivisions. Those are brought into obligatory reserves, and they're basically revenue from a developer that we're holding on to until a project comes along that we need to spend the money on. They are accounted for differently, and you'll see them differently in this list. And then there's your depreciation reserves in your water utility. So every year there's an amount of money set aside in the water utility to set aside for depreciation. So that money is in a reserve as well. So this report outlines those reserves. It also, I'm just going to jump over to the policy itself. When you look through the policy, the key part, so there is a policy component that I'm assuming you've all read, basically says that we shall set aside money in reserves, and this shall be the list. So this is an example of general tax rate reserves that you have. So we have taken all of those discussions and decisions and practices of council, and we've put them into a table that describes what the reserve is, what it's used for, and generally how it's funded. So decisions of council as to how it gets funded. So for example, I think one that everyone can relate to is the election reserve. So every year we set aside a certain amount of money every year so that every 4 years we have enough money to run an election. So on your election year, you're not having to increase your tax rate by $100,000 to run the election. You set aside $25,000 every year to make that reserve up. So this is a list of all of those reserves that we have, and every one of them has been documented with respect to what it's for, how it's funded, or how it was initially funded, and then any sort of differences that we want to document for council. So jumping back over to the report, there are some recommendations that as we went through and cleaned up the reserves a little bit that we want to make through this report and that we've incorporated into that table in the policy. Some of them are just amalgamations of reserves. So you might have had 3 different reserves. We've put them into one. For an example, the first one is the internet reserve. Years ago, we were budgeting and we didn't know what the budget for the next year was going to be for internet. Our service provider wasn't giving us a good answer. So that year, council set some money aside in a reserve called the IT Internet Reserve, in case the next year we did come up with a larger bill and we had to find the money. That didn't happen, so that money is still sitting in that reserve. So the recommendation through this report is just to merge those into our hardware, internet or IT hardware network reserves, which we do use all the time, and we use as a means to avoid those ups and downs in your tax rate. The other one is amalgamating some of our economic development reserves. There was one reserve that was set aside when we had an economic development office in Kennecott. So amalgamating those into the current reserves. Deletion of the green carts reserve. This money has served us well over the years, but it will be depleted. So at the end of the year, that reserve will be removed from the policy. some renaming. And then the last one is just a note for council. So every June, council gets a memo that takes the unspent portions of some of our GL accounts and recommends that they get put into the reserves that they were meant to fund. As part of year end, we do those entries before we come to council so the auditors can look at them. But the auditors need that motion and that report to approve it because we don't have it anywhere in policy that that's what you intended to do at the start of the year. So what this report does is it formalizes the fact that you actually budget for contracts and conference dues and fire department training funds, your grants, your legal fees, pension, health benefits, power and maintenance, professional fees, things to do with the sportsplex and waste management. All of that, you have a practice of budgeting a certain dollar value, and then what's left you put into reserves, a specific reserve at the end of the year. So this policy will now avoid having to come back to council and get approval to do that every year. It would just be done as a matter of your year-end accounting because it would be in policy. So as far as strategic alignment, as I mentioned earlier, you do have some retiring staff members in finance over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's important to get this information. Right now, this information is in my brain, Sue's brain, Janice's, and Jordan's, and I think that's probably it. So to get this down is a great succession tool. And as well, we do have an objective in our strategic plan to enhance our financial framework and continue to support that long-term longevity of our municipality and sustainability, financial sustainability. So this absolutely plays into that strategic alignment. Your alternatives, you can reject the policy or you can give us direction on where we go next if you don't want what we've put in front of you. And then, of course, attached to your agenda was the special reserves policy draft. The table at the back is really the money table. It has everything broken down. We've also coded them, so we'll be able to tie them back to our spreadsheet with certainty of the balances in those accounts. General starts with G. You get into urban service rate, has their own, there's a lot of general reserves, as you can see. So the urban service rate starts with U in the table. Lots going on in the urban service rate for reserves. We also have area rate reserves for your lights in your communities outside the corridor, and then the sportsplex ones. And then, of course, the water utility has the depreciation reserve, and the obligatory reserves are also listed in the table, what they're for and how they get funded. So, Mr. Chairman, that is the presentation of the policy. The policy is attached to the agenda. I think I've hit the highlights in my presentation, and I'd look for a direction from committee on how we move forward.
Thank you, CAO. Be looking to council for direction. I see lights on, but nothing's coming up here, so I'm going to go with, I believe, there they go. Councillor Tingley.
Through the chair, I think this is nothing but good planning. We know we're going to have these future expenses, whether they're known or unknown, and some of them are going to be large expenses, some of them smaller expenses, but I think it would be careless not to have good policy. One thing that I was really impressed with when I joined council was the reserve practicing and the financial position that the municipality is in. But as it grows, I think it's very important to have a policy like this. And I commend Sue Surratt and everybody else that was involved in establishing these reserves. So I'm prepared to make the motion as it's recommended.
Moved by Councillor Tingley, seconded by Councillor Garden-Cole. Seeing nobody left to speak. Questions and calls. We'll go to the vote. And the motion has passed unanimously. That brings us to the end of corporate and residential services. The time is 10:20. We are right on break time. So let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll return at 10:35 to go into infrastructure and operations committee at that time. So looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved. Seconded by Councillor Hebb. All those in favor? Aye. Motion's carried. We are adjourned till 10:35.
Okay, welcome back. We're going to call the Infrastructure and Operations meeting to order. Before we do that, we're proposing an amendment to the agenda, moving Parks and Rec to follow I&O before lunch. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, the motion has passed unanimously. We're looking for the approval of the minutes of November 15th, 2022. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Okay, our first item today is solid waste transportation contract with Andrea.
Good morning, everyone. So this morning, I'm reporting on the results of our transportation for solid waste RFP that went out. Our current contract runs out March 31st of 2023. Our transportation of solid waste contract was issued November 1st and closed on the 30th. And as a result, we had one proposal received. This transportation contract is for moving our garbage, our recyclables, and our organics to the 3 processing facilities from our site. Our current contractor is Royal Environmental, and they've been providing us the services since 2020. In the current fiscal year, or last year's fiscal year, at the end, it was $149,000 value plus HST. So with the new RFP that went out, Royal Environmental submitted a proposal, and they were fully compliant. The proposal submitted was valued at $178,000 plus HST. And again, as we know from earlier in the fall, our organics processing location's changing April. So previously we currently are going to Fundy Compost, but starting April we'll be going to Guysborough County at the GFL location. So with that, staff are recommending the award of the transportation solid waste contract. It's a 3-year term starting April 1st, and we do have a recommended motion there. Any questions?
Okay. First up is Councillor Green.
I would move the recommended motion.
Okay, seconded? Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Head. Go to the vote.
Question.
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. And the motion has passed unanimously.
I would do.
Okay, our second item on the agenda is the solid waste transportation contract, which is Andrea as well.
Attached, this is just a verbal update. So attached to the agenda are 2 letters that were submitted on Friday. One was from the warden on behalf of council to our Minister of Environment. And the second one is a letter from our CAO to the Nova Scotia Solid Waste Resource Team. And these were responses into the targeted engagement related to construction demolition regulation changes. As you know, staff came forward in July, provided you a report on some of the changes that came about early in July, and council was rather concerned about that. Since July, staff have been participating, both staff and elected officials have been participating in meetings on the discussion of these changes. There was a targeted engagement session held mid-November, and municipalities were provided an opportunity to comment by last Friday, which was December 9th. So those are the 2 letters in your package. The one from the CAO to the resource team is very detailed outline of some of our comments on that targeted component, and the other one was from the warden, just an updated letter to the minister on the position of council. So if anybody has any questions, or if Jesse, you want to add anything?
Okay. Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, to add to it is the update and posting of the letters today is to demonstrate not just to executive committee, but also to our public that the municipality has fallen through on being very active in the consultation opportunity. We've been seen as champions on the topic on behalf of municipal units and operating sites to voice concerns with the regulations. It wasn't set up in the most ideal way. There's still lots of questions, but East Hants has had a voice and has put in considerable effort to try to make this as successful as possible long-term for both East Hants and Nova Scotia. And that's the demonstration that we're looking to achieve today from this conversation.
Okay, thank you for that. Any discussion on this topic? Councillor Hebb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to add to that, and promoting this, it's going to be very detrimental to a lot of municipalities in the province. We're kind of better in a situation than a lot of them, but there's a lot of municipalities, this is going to be really, very rough on them if this goes through. So it's just to let the council know the impact that this may cause throughout the whole province. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hebb. Seeing no one else to speak, there are no motions coming from this presentation. And that brings us to the end of Infrastructure and Operations Committee. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Hebb. All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Okay, moving right into Parks and Recreation Committee. I'd like to call Parks and Rec to order. Looking for the approval of the minutes of November 15th, 2022. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Our first item is open space disposal on Meadowview Way in Belnan, and Alana Tapper and Debbie Eula presenting.
All right, so open space disposal of PID 453-54677 in Belnan. So PRC staff received an a preliminary plan of subdivision for review in Belnan, and as part of the review, the initial review, staff determined that there was an opportunity to improve both pedestrian and vehicular connectivity in the Garden Meadow subdivision. As a result, staff are requesting that consideration be given by council to identify PID 453-54677 as surplus open space lands. If council approves the disposal of open space lands, the parcel will be disposed of in accordance with the council disposal for surplus property policy. And so here is the map. So this is the subject property under consideration. Each of these green areas are actually open space parcels. And this one right here is the Royal Oaks Playground Park. And again, it's this long one here that staff is requesting the disposal of. This, I don't know if you can see it up there or on your own monitors. There's a yellow kind of bubble around the Royal Oaks Playground, and that's the 600-meter catchment area of the existing playground and park. And both your parks, open space, and active transportation master plan and your playground development strategy use the 600-meter catchment area for the location of parks. So within that area, we say that there shouldn't be any other parks or playgrounds, just to provide that buffer. The size of the subject lands to be disposed of is approximately 17,000 meters squared, and it's located on Meadowview Way. And I have a satellite image of it here as well. So again, Meadowview Way, this is the subject property here. There's a little bit of a pond here, and again, the disposal of this will allow for access through the property, through the neighboring property, and onto Ridgewood Court that allows for quicker access to the playground. And this is the playground on Royal Oaks Way here, so it's a well-developed and nice playground. Opportunities for increased connectivity within Garden Meadows are positive for everyone living in the development. A better connectivity will allow residents, especially those with families with children to access Royal Oaks Park and Playground without having to venture out of the subdivision onto Garden Road, the Collector Road. Instead, residents living in Meadowview will be able to connect through the new proposed development on Ridgewood Court and connect into the park at the walkway at the end of Ridgewood Court. Alternatively, residents may choose to proceed onto Royal Oaks Way to explore the existing trails accessed off of this road. Increased connectivity is also enshrined by policy throughout the East Hansel Fisher Community Plan. The community plan discourages the use of cul-de-sacs and encourages street connections to increase connectivity and to discourage the use of vehicles for short trips, for example, going to the park. The connectivity also provides for efficient service delivery, for example, solid waste collection and snow clearing. You don't have to go around the cul-de-sacs, you can connect in and out. And again, this is just showing the preliminary plan of subdivision. Ridgewood Court would connect in here and out on to Meadowview. And at the end of Ridgewood Court, there's the connection into the park. Disposal of open space process. So both the Municipal Government Act and the Municipal Planning Strategy have regulations and policies that stipulate the process for the disposal of open space. A notice is required, and it was placed in the December 6th edition of the Chronicle Herald, and a letter was mailed to residents within 300 meters of the subject property to be disposed of, informing residents of the consideration of the disposal of open space by council at your meeting on December 21st. In accordance with the Municipal Government Act, any proceeds from the sale of the land has to be used for parks, playgrounds, and similar public purposes. If council deems the open space parcel as surplus land, the property will be disposed of in accordance with the council disposal of surplus property policy. Part of this disposal will require the road connection be required through that adjoining property. Land use designation and zone change. So as part of the open space disposal process, the current land use designation zone of the property to be disposed of will have to be changed from the community use CU designation and open space OS zone to the country residential CR designation and zone. And that's to allow for the future development of residential sites. So under the current zoning, you can't do anything other than parks and other public purposes. So it has to be rezoned, and it is recommended that Parks, Recreation, and Culture Committee had authorized staff to proceed with the mapping amendments to the East Hansel Fisher Community Plan process. And first reading of the proposed community plans amendments is anticipated to take place in early 2023. And it's recommended that council declare the open space parcel PID 45354677 surplus for disposal, and recommend the council change the designation and rezone the open space parcel to country residential CR as part of the plan update. And the more detailed recommendation is below, and it also talks about how the property is proposed to be disposed of using the expression of interest method as per your policy, with submissions to be brought to council for consideration and direction, and complete the property and legal review work to be funded through the open space reserves required to ensure roadway connectivity with neighboring properties. And again, the change as part of the plan update. And of course, the first one, declare that it's deemed surplus property. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Any discussion on that? Councillor Hebb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to staff, can this be done in one motion, or would you like 3 separate motions for this?
One's fine.
One's fine. And that's the case, I'll move the recommended motion that's presented in front of us.
Okay, motion is moved and seconded. Anyone to speak on the motion? Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. And the motion has passed unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the Community Grant Program Policy Updates with Alana Tapper and Mr. Preston and Corinne Giles. Oh, and before
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I should have mentioned earlier today that I have two directors out with various sicknesses, so Alana isn't here today, but her staff are all pitch hitting for her, and of course Sue, I mentioned earlier, was not here, but she's also out with illness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this report is the Community Grant Program Policy Review. So this past summer in July 2022, Council directed staff to review the funding amount allocated to athletes for travel, attending sporting events. And under the recreation programming category, staff took a review of the entire policy, and we have some recommendations that we're bringing forward in this report. So just some background. So in July 2022, Council passed the motion to grant an application of $100 per athlete to attend the AAA Baseball Nationals meeting in Alberta, and that staff bring back a report. So we'll be going through the details of our recommendations in this report here. It's important to note that Council felt that the $25 per East Hants player was not sufficient with the rising costs of travel. So in the community grant program, we've recommended the following changes. In one section of the recreation operating category of the grant, we're recommending that a itemized list of expenses be noted for facility maintenance projects. And this was just through staff experience of receiving applications and having conversations with applicants just on the details of the expenses. So we felt it was important to have an itemized list here for the facility maintenance projects. The next recommendation is what we're recommending as further exploration. And this is actually to remove the insurance piece from the community grant, but create a separate insurance grant program. We came to this recommendation because in 2019, insurance was added to the community grant program as an eligible expense. And since then, we've discovered that at least 50% or more of these grants are being used for insurance. So having a separate insurance grant program would allow the following things. It would allow for the community grant program to be better utilized for recreation community grant expenses. It would provide non-recreation organizations an opportunity to get funding for insurance. And it would provide, one insurance stream rather than different grant pots, and would also encourage organizations to obtain directors and officers liability insurance where they may not have it right now because of the expense that's there. And the last recommendation, which is really what sparked the conversation with Council in July, is that we're recommending to remove group funding and fund $100 per East Hants athlete rather than $25, as was originally in the policy. And we've just removed the reference to the word elite in the section A, referring to elite sport, just to be more inclusive. This would be for any sporting events of provincial, national, international caliber. So these recommended changes aligns with East Hants' goal of strong community. There is no financial impact with this report. The budget for the community grant program is a $33,000 budget that we have. It's first come, first serve. Alternatively, Council may not accept the recommended changes. And I will just go up to the recommendation, just so it's clear, is that staff are recommending that Parks, Recreation, and Culture Committee support the policy amendments outlined in the draft, and to consider the exploration of a separate program specifically funding non-for-profit insurance requests. And the more detailed recommended motion is there before you. Thank you.
Thank you. First up, Councillor Green.
So we move that in executive as well, or we move that at the end of the day? Okay. I would move the recommended motion.
Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Hebb. Any discussion? Any question? Oh, sorry, Counselor Hebb, you want to speak on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, and I should know this, but I don't. The $100 per athlete, is that for out of province or for in province events too?
Through you, Madam Chair, that would be for in-province as well, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Question.
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. And the motion has passed unanimously. And our final topic is the Walton Playground lease agreement with Alana and, oh, you, okay. Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is basically just approval to enter into a lease agreement with Walton Fire. And in last year's capital budget, we were there was approval for a playground to be put in Walton area. Staff did some research on that, and we determined that the fire department is probably the best location in the area. Central, very visible coming from the west-hand side, very open to the public, and there's events held there sometimes. And the fire department is willing and interested in having the playground on their property. So basically, we would enter into a lease agreement and would install a playground this coming year, and would manage the playground going forward on their property. So basically, staff has recommended to council that we enter into a 20-year lease agreement with the Walton Shore Fire Department Association that would allow the municipality to install and maintain a playground on their property.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Green first.
I would move the recommended motion.
Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Tingley, and Councillor Hebb was on before the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the staff, with this playground going on the property, who would carry the insurance for the playground? Would that be the Walton Fire Department, or would that be the municipality?
Through you, Madam Chair, it would be the municipality. Would insure, just like if we own the property.
Right.
That's the model why we went this way, is because to limit the insurance issues that the Walton Fire was going to face if it was theirs.
Just wanted to clarify. Thank you very much.
Okay, and the motion is on the floor. Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. And the vote has passed unanimously. And that concludes our business with Parks and Rec. We'll be looking for a motion to adjourn.
Before we do that, we're going to move the camera. Discuss the so, oh yeah, we're going to go back to corporate residential.
So we're going to corporate and residential? Okay, so we are going to adjourn Parks and Rec and move into corporate and residential services. All those in favor? Aye. And we are adjourned.
You need a motion to amend your agenda and go into corporate services.
So before we move formally into corporate residential services, we're going to need another motion to amend the agenda to bring corporate residential services before lunch. Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Musa. All those in favor? All right, I'd like to recall the Corporate Residential Services Committee to order. And our first item is an in-camera land issue, so I'll be looking for a motion to move into camera. Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Musa. All those in favor? Aye. We will wait as we move into camera. Good. All right. I'd like to report that we met in camera to discuss a land and contractual issues. And coming from that, there are no motions coming forward at this time. So now that we're at the hour of adjournment for lunch, I will look for a motion to adjourn for lunch to reconvene at 1:30 for Planning and Advisory Committee. Moved by Councilor Green, seconded by Councilor Hebb. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary? Motion is passed. We are adjourned